My name's Jeremy Tomley.
Spike Richards with Saber Bats.
My name is Tasha Messer-Williams.
Benjamin Green.
My name is Seth Voorhees, and I am a modern-day bladesmith.
Whether it's down-home Southern cooking, skilled craftsmanship, or beautiful artwork, Mississippi is full of amazing people and amazing stories. So let them tell you what it means to be made in Mississippi.
My name is Seth Voorhees, and I am a modern-day bladesmith. I was born and raised on the coast in Mississippi, but have lived throughout different parts of the state my whole life. I've lived in Starkville, Mississippi. I've lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and now I reside completely on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and that's where I really like to call home. I got into bladesmithing back in 2015 by a very good friend of mine, Paul Labata. I had always bought knives from him. I was around 14 years old whenever I first bought my custom knife, and it was from him. And what ended up happening is every year I would buy a couple of custom blades from him, and he kept telling me that he would like for me to come and watch him in his shop. And I would give some of the weirdest answers, like, I just don't think I'm artistic enough. Until finally, whenever I was 25, Mr. Paul told me he was not going to make me another custom knife until I come and watched him. And so I came to his shop and watched him build that knife, and I was hook, line, and sinker ever since. Mr. Paul still teaches me, so to speak. I actually bought my first forge from him, and he actually helped set up and get me my first grinder, somebody who was wanting to get rid of it, get out of the hobby of knife making, and he helped facilitate me buying that grinder. And then I started doing sketches and drawings of things that I wanted to try and do, and I started doing those by myself and always going back to Mr. Paul for advice and how things are supposed to feel, how they're supposed to look, how they're supposed to function, the weight of a knife, until eventually I started branching out into my own style, into my own ways of how things are supposed to look and feel. Forged in Fire was one of the most stressful, fun experiences of my life because they gave us a task that was to make ladder pattern Damascus with an actual ladder. Now, the ladder was built out of high carbon steel, so that way it wasn't junk steel, anything like that. It was all hardenable material. The rungs was 1084 and the sides was 15N20, so that way we could make our Damascus. And the thing that went through my head the most is that don't worry about the clock, just have an idea in your head, and this is where you want to be by this time, and this is where you want to be by this time, and just forge a knife. Even if you mess up, it doesn't matter. You're still doing what you love to do. It's really the best way I know how to put it because the camera is there in your face a lot. There's a whole bunch of people on the forge floor that you don't see. There's a lot of interviews going on while you're doing it, and that clock never stops. So you want to try to stay as focused as possible while trying to have fun. It's most stressful fun. But also be ready to improvise if something happens. Don't waste time. And you're fortunate enough to go into the final round, they give you a historical weapon. And my historical weapon was Napoleon's saber, which was pretty awesome because I always joke around about Napoleon all the time to Jessica because one of our favorite movies, he says, and like Napoleon, I will divide and conquer. And I tell Jessica that whether I'm taking out the trash, whether I'm fixing supper, putting a load of laundry on, I tell her that and she's like, you are not Napoleon, stop. And whenever I got to the final weapon, and Will Willis removed the cloth and he said Napoleon's saber, I just died laughing. I couldn't help it. I was like, Jessica's not going to believe this. She says, what weapon do you have to forge? I said, like Napoleon, I will divide and conquer. No. I said, yes. That's going to be on the History Channel forever. After Forged in Fire, I am not a full-time bladesmith, but I am working on that still. I am a full-time crane operator, and this is what I do as a hobby for fun. I would love for it to be more full-time to where I can sell classes, apprenticeships. That's all in the future, but I have to take baby steps because Mr. Paul, as world-renowned bladesmith as he is also a great advisor to everything else in life. He said, be sure you don't quit your day job. And I've taken that advice wholeheartedly because you do still want this to be fun. Because I do still have to think about my wife and daughters. Just quitting my job up and foremost is not the best thing to do, not for a married man. Southern Longbeard's website is what it is. I'll tell you how Southern Longbeard's actually started. Because everybody that talks to me, they're like, Southern Longbeard's knives, you don't even have a beard. I said, well, it didn't actually start out as that. I started making turkey calls, is what I was making. And like any good coastal person, if you buy a used boat that's already named, you don't change the name of the boat. It's bad luck. So whenever I transitioned from turkey calls into bladesmithing, I kept the name. And so what I've done is I have a website, Southern Longbeard's Knives, slbknives.com, where people can contact and reach me. When forging a knife, you're taking a raw piece of steel and you are putting it in the forge and bringing it to its most malleable state. Not too hot to where the steel actually burns, but not too cold to where you can't move it, because it has to be moved with your hammer. So, like I said, it has to be in its most malleable state. And depending on the style of blade that you are making is the way you hit it with the hammer. Because if you're making, say, a good recurve blade, you got to hit it a certain way in order to make the blade have its curvature. If you're wanting to do a clip point, you got to start the blade differently. You actually build a knife upside down, and it's kind of odd, how that works, but I'll definitely show you what I mean by that. And what you do is whenever you get to your most desired shape forging, everything, I'll bring it back over to my 2x72 grinder, and I will profile the blade to its final shape of profile. That's what I'll do. And then I'll make sure everything is 100% flat. I'll surface grind the blade. It's all good, clean steel. And then I'll begin the process of hollow grinding or flat grinding the blade, depending on what style of knife someone is ordering, is depending on what style of grind I will do to the blade itself. Like if you're going to be hunting, doing a lot of skinning, a lot of meat slicing, I'll more than likely hollow grind the blade. If you're going to be bushcrafting and surviving, you're more than likely going to be getting a flat grind, so you have a little bit more meat behind that edge and can take a sure enough beating if that's what you're doing bushcraft wise. After that, I go into what you call the heat treatment of the blade. And what that does is it turns the steel in a state where it's not too hard to where it'll chip and break, nor will it get dull very quickly. It's got to be in between a 59 and 61 Rockwell, and a Rockwell is a hardness test for steel. That's what it is. And most of your carbon steels are in between 59 and 61 is what I do. And after I heat treat the blade, I'll do my own testing before I do the handle on there, because if I don't test this blade before I put a handle on there, I can put a handle on a knife and the edge chips, it rolls, it doesn't hold the edge very good. Well, then I got a knife that's got a handle on it that's useless. So if I test it beforehand, I do 30 cuts of cardboard, deer antler chop, and then a brass rod flex test on the edge. and if it still cuts paper with no problem or shaves my arm hair, good to go. I can put a handle on it. Now I'll tape it up because I don't want to work with a sharp knife, or I'll dull the edge down while I'm working on it, and then once I put the handle on there, whether it be a hidden tang or a full tang knife, I will resharpen it back up, and then it'll be time for the sheath. Every knife I make comes with a custom fit leather sheath because you can't just carry that knife around without it. And you'll have a knife, that will last to your great grandkids as long as it's taken care of. I have knives from whenever I was 13 years old, and I'm about to be 36, and they look almost the same from whenever I had them back when I was 13. This is my Hudson Bay camp knife style right here. And all of these lines that you see in here are actual legitimate pieces of cable. And the way it was created, not exactly like they made the old ingots of steel, but it's the same concept of making an ingot of steel and everything in what we would call canister Damascus. And canister Damascus, what I did is I took these pieces of cable and I put them in a mild steel can with 1080 powder with nickel. Well, it's got 2% nickel in it, so it has contrast. And what I did is I brought it up to forge welding temperature, and I compressed that canister on all 4 corners, so that way it would become an ingot of steel. Again, not exactly how the Japanese make the tamahogany steel, but it is along the same concept. That's where the modern bladesmith comes in from, right there. For anyone who is wanting to get into the art of bladesmithing, and for any hobby in that fact, one of the first things that I suggest doing is really studying up on the craft and seeing how it's done. There are a lot of people that want to come into it and just go all in, and they get discouraged because their knife doesn't look like my knife, or my knife doesn't look like this person's knife. And with anything, it is consistency. So if you're going to do, and that's anything, you want to be consistent. Bladesmithing is very relatable to everyday life. As that knife is being forged and fired and forged to shape to the knife that eventually it will become, same as life is with a person, and that's anybody. Life puts you in the fire and you are forged until you are the person that you end up wanting to be.